spell Imhotep, I-M-H-O-T-E-P. So share this broadcast on your Facebook page. Invite your friends to tune in also. So Trump impeachment trial number 2. We saw that the Republicans ignored facts. They ignored the bombshells that John Bolton, who is a lifelong Republican, John Bolton was dropping bombshells leaked to the New York Times. And one of the things that Republicans were furious about in the Senate is that John Bolton sent a copy of his manuscript for his upcoming book being released March 17th. He sent that to the White House December 30th, 2019. The White House did not give GOP senators a heads up of what's in the book. So bombshells were dropping this past week. We're going to talk some about that because John Bolton was not just incriminating Trump and the three amigos. John Bolton was incriminating White House counsel Pat Cipollone. He was incriminating him as well. Okay, so we'll deal some with that, and then we know that they voted not to hear witnesses this past Friday, Republicans. Out of 15 impeachment trials, 2 involving presidents, the other 13, basically most of those involving federal judges, first impeachment trial to not have witnesses in the Senate. And the Senate is where the trial takes place. The Senate is where the trial takes place. So what is a trial without witnesses? This is what people are asking. Then and then also former National Security Advisor John Bolton says that Trump tied Ukraine aid into investigation into the Bidens. So New York Times has a series of articles dealing with this as well. People should really check this out. Let's see, one of them is from January 31st, 2020. Trump told Bolton to help his Ukraine pressure campaign, book says. This book is going to be explosive, comes out March 17th, 2020. If the White House doesn't try to block it. But the other thing is if the White House is saying that there is classified information in here, right? John Bolton was a national security advisor. He knows what's classified and what's not. Not only that, if their argument is John Bolton is lying, well, when you write a book like that, when you work for the White House and you're going to write a book and talk about your time at the White House, you have to submit a copy of it to the White House, to certain departments that you work for them to vet it before it's released, before it's published. So you already know that. So you're saying that John Bolton knowingly put lies in here, knowing he had to submit it to the White House to be approved? Okay. There's another one. Trump tied Ukraine aid to inquiries he sought. Bolton book says, January 26, 2020, New York Times, Trump tied Ukraine aid to inquiries he sought. Bolton book says, drafts of the book outline the potential testimony of the former national security advisor if he were called as a witness in the president's impeachment trial. So what was interesting is that you have Republicans like outgoing Senator Lamar Alexander of Tennessee, who said that the prosecution, the House managers, they made their case, they made their argument. He said they proved that Trump did wrong, but it didn't rise to the level of removal from office. So a lot of people are asking, well, what does the president have to do to be removed from office? What rises to the level? They're saying, no, you proved your case. Very interesting. So then also, January 30th, I did a Facebook Live broadcast earlier in the week. January 30th was the anniversary of Dr. King's house being firebombed in Montgomery, Alabama, January 30th, 1956, during the Montgomery bus boycott. We'll talk a little bit about that. Last week, we ran out of time. I didn't get a chance to deal with Georgia Gilmore. Georgia Gilmore was a cook, an African-American female cook who helped to feed and fund the Montgomery bus boycott. We'll deal with her fantastic story. And I'm going to try to squeeze in the story as well, dealing with the first Black president in North America, who was Vicente Guerrero of Mexico. Vicente Guerrero of Mexico. He was a former slave, okay? All right. On the African History Network show, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's corrects wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. So when you control the radius of a man's thoughts, you can control the circumference of his actions, because the mind can't do or teach what it doesn't know. So we deal with a number of different topics here on the show. We deal with current events and history, politics, education, economic empowerment, entrepreneurship, relationships, love, sex, health issues, and much, much more. Sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, to 22828 to sign up for our email newsletter. Also go to our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Sign up for our email newsletter there as well. I will be speaking at Nandy's Knowledge Cafe coming up Saturday, February 8th, 2020, 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. Nandy's Knowledge Cafe. I think the new address is 50 Oakman Avenue, I think it is, Oakman Boulevard, Highland Park, Michigan. We'll get the information up on our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. It's a free event, donations accepted. So this is my African American History Month presentation. We'll deal with Black migration, 1619 to 2019. We'll deal with this year's theme also, which is African Americans and the vote. We're going to deal with a lot of history. So that's coming up Saturday, February 8th, 71 Oakland Boulevard. That's what it is, 71 Oakland Boulevard. New location for Nandy's Knowledge Cafe, 71 Oakland Boulevard, Highland Park, Michigan. And their phone number there is area code 313-865-1288, 313-865-1288. We'll get the flyer up at my website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. If you want me to do a presentation for a group or organization, especially for the month of February, email me, customer service at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, customer service at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. I'll be speaking in a number of places in the month of February. You can also call area code 313-462-0003. 313-462-0003. All right. So, okay, so let's jump into this. All right, so this past week, we saw, this was a historic week, right, for a number of reasons. And I'm going to share some clips with you here to recap some of the things that took place this week. So we saw a shredding of the U.S. Constitution and the display of corruption that the U.S. accuses other countries of. On Friday, January 31st, 2020, we saw 50 Republican senators who violated their oath to defend the U.S. Constitution against enemies, both foreign and domestic. And this chair is messed up too. Against enemies, both foreign and domestic. They voted not to hear from witnesses, while John Bolton, who was Trump's former national security advisor. Now, John Bolton was not a holdover from the Obama administration. John Bolton was picked by Trump. So this is Trump's former national security advisor. He's in on all this, okay? And remember that John Bolton said he did not want to be part of a drug deal that Rudy Giuliani was cooking up, all right? John Bolton is implicating the people who were involved in this. So they voted not to hear from witnesses while John Bolton was dropping bombs that are excerpts from his upcoming book that will be released March 17th, 2020. Many Republican senators are feeling blindsided because the White House had a copy of John Bolton's manuscript since December 30th, 2019, and they were not given a heads up of what was in the book. We found out from John Bolton's revelations that White House counsel Pat Cipollone was in on the plot. This is an ethical violation because Pat Cipollone could very well be a fact witness while defending the co-conspirators and arguing against hearing from witnesses. No wonder he didn't want to hear from witnesses. He didn't want to incriminate himself. So all of them, so some of them, I think it's about 20 Republican senators up for re-election November 3rd, 2020, okay? All of them need to be voted out of office. All the ones that voted against hearing witnesses need to be voted out of office. And this is what a lot of people are talking about. They're more concerned about saving their Senate seat than they are about saving the country from a corrupt tyrant they are afraid of. So what's really disturbing is that when you see some of the interviews with them, Lamar Alexander was interviewed. You had another one, Senator Ernst was interviewed as well. And Senator Ernst said she thinks that Trump will go through the proper channels next time. Really? That's what you think? He's gonna go through the proper channels next time? I don't think so. Okay. All right. So I want to go to, let's see, we're coming up on a break here in about 7 minutes. Let's go to this first clip here. This is from MSNBC, Ali Velshi, Why the System Has Failed. Why the System Has Failed. This is from February 1st, 2020, and he's breaking down some of the previous impeachment trials. Let's go to this clip.
President Trump's impeachment trial has played out, but one of the biggest complaints has been about whether this trial has been as rigorous or as thorough as it could have been. Well, for fact's sake, it wasn't. By some standards, it wasn't even a real trial. Now, in fairness, a Senate impeachment trial is different from any other trial you have witnessed or that I have watched on Law and Order. Despite being presided over by the Chief Justice of the United States, impeachment is essentially more of a political process than a strictly legal one, and the 100 senators are not only supposedly impartial jurors, they are also ultimately judges. They control the proceedings. A normal trial also has a standard set of rules and procedures. Senate trials do not, hence the huge debate over the rules at the start of the proceedings. Now, the Senate has held more than a dozen impeachment trials over its 231-year history, most of them about judges who are appointed for life. So impeachment is the only way to remove them if they do naughty things. Until now, all of those trials have included witnesses. President Andrew Johnson's trial in 1868 had 41 witnesses. President Bill Clinton's trial in 1999 had a special prosecutor with a lot of evidence and 3 witnesses. President Trump's had none. As for the federal judges, some of these trials had a large number of witnesses. 55 witnesses were at Judge Alcee Hastings' 1989 trial, 26 witnesses at Judge Thomas Porsche's trial in 2010. This is the last impeachment trial before this one. 21 at Judge Harry Claiborne's trial in 1986, and there were 10 witnesses at Judge Walter Nixon's trial in 1989. Now, some Republicans have suggested that the Senate has no duty to go beyond the testimony that was obtained by the House. But according to the Washington Post, 7 witnesses who testified in Judge Nixon's trial in 1989 had not testified before that in the House. 17 witnesses for Judge Porsche's trial in 2010 had not testified before that in the House. 17 of the 53 current Republican senators serving today took part in this trial and heard from these 17 witnesses who hadn't testified before that in the House. At the beginning of this trial, all 100 senators took an oath in which they swore to do impartial justice. But some Republican senators made it clear well before the trial they had no intention of upholding that promise.
Everything I do during this, I'm coordinating with White House counsel. There will be no difference between the president's position and our position as to how to handle this to the extent that we can. I'm not an impartial juror. This is a political process. There's not anything judicial about it. Impeachment is a political decision. The House made a partisan political decision to impeach. I would anticipate we will have a largely partisan outcome in the Senate. I'm not impartial about this at all.
I am clearly made up my mind. I'm not trying to hide the fact that I have disdain for the accusations in the process, so I don't need any witnesses. The president can make a request to call witnesses. They can make a request to call Mike Pence and Pompeo and Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. I am ready to vote on the underlying articles. I don't really need to hear a lot of witnesses.
All right, let's be clear. No one is actually above the law, not even the President of the United States. But the President's defense team made an argument that many legal scholars say is absurd, that he cannot be impeached because he can't do anything wrong if he acts in the public interest. This, however, is not a new argument.
When the president does it, that means that it is not illegal.
I have an article too, where I have the right to do whatever I want as president.
If a president does something which he believes will help him get elected in the public interest, that cannot be the kind of quid pro quo that results in impeachment.
Now, if you're like me, not a lawyer, that's a head scratcher. The Constitution says that the president shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. But if the president is acquitted, as expected, the standard put forward by Alan Dershowitz, from whom you just heard, will stand as a precedent for future presidents, that no matter what they do, such as seeking re-election help from a foreign government, it's okay, and Congress can't do anything about it. a point the House managers made during the Senate's question period this week.
If the Senate fails to reject this theory, what would stop a president from withholding disaster aid funding from a U.S. city until that mayor endorses him?
If this Senate were to say that's acceptable, then precisely as was outlined in that question could take place all across America in the context of the next election and any election. Grants allocated to cities or towns or municipalities across the country. But the president could say, you're not going to get that money, Mr. Mayor, Mrs. County Executive, Mrs. Town Supervisor, unless you endorse me for re-election.
Impeachment was designed to prevent something like this. When we come back, we're going to take a look at where the system failed and what it could mean for our very democracy. You're watching MSNBC.
Okay, all right. So that was Ali Velshi. Okay, check that out at msnbc.com. That is Why the System Failed. That's from February 1st, 2020, Why the System Failed. Okay, when we come back, I want you to hear Ari Melber talk to Alan Dershowitz about his crazy theory, because the overwhelming majority of legal scholars, constitutional law professors say Alan Dershowitz is wrong. 9:10 a.m. the Superstation, WFDF, the African History Network show. I'm Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. Shit, man, all these chairs are messed up. Damn. I'm about to bring my own chair.
Want this chair?
That one's messed up too.
That one's messed up too?
Yeah. Every chair in here is messed up.
Dang. All right, guys, stand by. We'll be back in a couple minutes here. How's everybody doing? Share this broadcast on your Facebook page and on YouTube. Invite your friends to tune in also.
Mahomes played worst game of his career. That interception on Tyreek Hill was an underthrown football. Now a flag. That's on KC.
All right. Okay, we have Alma. How you doing, Alma?
They're out of time.
We all love fighting,
This game is
but the
almost
problem
over.
is all that excess oil and fat.
Got 9 minutes left. Oh, yeah, you can say
Who else we have here? Mimi. How you doing, Mimi? In Philadelphia, Loretta, Latoya, Erica.
40 seconds.
All right. All right, if you all like this type of information, also you can donate to the African History Network, paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show. Also at our website at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Let me pull up this information here. And then all of my DVD lectures at our website, also AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We have a lot of my presentations on digital download also.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 9:10 a.m. Superstation WFDF. Hey, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, February 2nd, 2020, and we are live tonight. Hope everybody's doing well. Calling number is area code 313-778-7600. 313-778-7600 is the call-in number. If you have a question or comment, everybody share this broadcast on your Facebook page and YouTube channels also. And then we're broadcasting on 9:10 a.m. Superstation's Facebook page as well. Okay, so right before the break, we were talking about some of what happened this week. This crazy week is a historical week as well. Has a lot of legal scholars scratching their heads from this idiotic defense that Alan Dershowitz made. And then he was forced to back when legal scholars came out after him. Lawrence Tribe, Elie Mystal, Maya Wiley, okay? He was forced to back away from it and say, no, you're mischaracterizing what I'm saying. TheHill.com had an article about this, but he also had a conversation with Ari Melber on MSNBC. Okay, so we're going to go to that here in just a second, but I want to look at a couple of articles here. Huffington Post had one. Republicans now say it doesn't matter if there was a quid pro quo with Ukraine. Republicans now say it doesn't matter if there was a quid pro quo with Ukraine. For months, they adamantly denied that Trump withheld aid to Ukraine in exchange for an announcement of investigations into Joe Biden. Republicans now maintain Donald Trump was completely justified in engaging in a quid pro quo with Ukraine after an extended period of time, adamantly denying that it had ever happened at all. First, they said it didn't happen, okay? Then they said, oh, he was well within his right to do it. Well, I thought you said it didn't happen. Last year, after the White House released a summary of Trump's infamous July 25th, 2019 conversation with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, Republicans insisted that they saw no evidence of a direct link between security assistance to Ukraine and the opening of investigations into former Vice President Joe Biden, a potential Trump opponent in the 2020 election. So Senator Lindsey Graham, you heard in the clip that we just played, Lindsey Graham said, I don't need to hear witnesses, things like this. Now the senators take an oath they take an additional oath to be impartial witnesses for a impeachment trial. Okay. Senator Lindsey Graham and Senator Mitch McConnell violated those oaths. Everybody knows they violated those oaths. So Senator Lindsey Graham told Axios.com in October, quote, if you could show me that Trump actually was engaging in a quid pro quo outside the phone call, that would be very disturbing, end quote. That's what Lindsey Graham said in October 2019. Now, Senator Steve Kramer, Republican of North Dakota, said it clearly isn't a quid pro quo. He said this in November 2019 after several top U.S. diplomats testified before the House of Representatives that the Trump administration did, in fact, withhold aid to Ukraine in exchange for an investigation into a political opponent. But Republicans changed their story on the matter this past week after the New York Times revealed the existence of a book manuscript from former National Security Advisor John Bolton. The book, which is due to be released March 17, 2020, alleges that Donald Trump told National Security Advisor at the time, John Bolton, directly that the aid to Ukraine was tied to the Ukrainian government opening investigations into Joe Biden and his son, Hunter Biden. The revelation, now, so John Bolton is a lifelong Republican, okay? And he was picked to be National Security Advisor by Trump. It's not like he was it's not like he was in the Obama administration. No, he worked in other previous Republican administrations. So the revelation from a firsthand witness threatened to derail Republican desires for a quick acquittal of Donald Trump in the Senate impeachment trial this past week and upped the pressure on them to allow witnesses such as John Bolton to testify and new documents to be presented during the proceedings. Also, at the same time, Lev Parnas is dropping videos. Lev Parnas is dropping more information, and he's got more information. Lev Parnas has more evidence also. During their opening arguments this past week in the U.S. Senate, Trump's defense team contended that even if John Bolton's account were true, it would not merit the removal of a president during an election year. Their argument opened the door for some Republican senators to acknowledge that Trump did, in fact, withhold Ukraine aid, but that it didn't merit his removal from office because he was morally justified in seeking investigations into the Bidens. So we have this article, Republicans now say it doesn't matter if there was a quid pro quo with Ukraine. Then there's an article from January 31st, 2020. Republicans are twisting themselves into knots trying to justify acquitting Trump. This is from Huffington Post. There's another one from Huffington Post, okay? This is from January 31st, 2020, 6:06 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That was this past Friday. Republican senators are providing incredulous explanations of their views on Donald Trump's pressure campaign toward Ukraine and what sort of punishment he deserves over it, if any. as a final vote on whether to remove him from office looms in the Republican-controlled Senate. So that vote is going to take place this past Wednesday. It's expected that Republicans are going to acquit him. Now, the swift acquittal promised by Senator Majority Leader Moscow Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, who's up for re-election November 3rd, 2020, at the trial's outset became all but certain this past Thursday night when Senator Lamar Alexander, Republican from Tennessee, who is retiring as he should, he was a key swing vote. He indicated he would vote against calling witnesses in a vote that took place this past Friday. On Friday, the Senate followed through and voted to block witnesses from appearing, a first time in the history of presidential impeachment trials. There was one impeachment of a federal judge where they had 26 witnesses in the Senate for the trial. Here, dealing with a president, they have 0 witnesses. So Lamar Alexander, in a statement explaining his decision, said he saw, he said, quote, he said he saw, quote, no need for more evidence to prove something that has already been proven. Republican Senator Lamar Alexander is saying that the House proved their case. He said that Trump pressured Ukraine to open investigations into a chief political rival, former Vice President Joe Biden. The position contradicted Trump's denial of that charge, the crux of the impeachment case against him, and the embrace of that denial by many other Republicans for months. Now, Republican Senator Lamar Alexander, who was not seeking another term this November 3rd, 2020, then argued that Trump's actions, though inappropriate, do not meet the bar for an impeachable offense. I'm trying to find out, what does the president have to do to be removed from office? And he said that the conflict over Trump's actions ought to instead be remedied in November's presidential election. But that's the very same election that Donald Trump has tried to influence by getting Ukraine to launch an investigation to his political opponent. You talking about that? You talking about that election? That's the election you're talking about? That makes no sense. To top it off, Senator Lamar Alexander told National Public Radio, NPR, in a Friday interview that Trump deserved re-election despite his disapproval of the president's actions with Ukraine. Well, wait a second. Now, so what I'm trying to figure out is, what are Republicans going to do when Trump does this again? Because he's going to do it again. You just emboldened him. What are you going to do when he does it again? So Senator Lamar Alexander's position confounded Democrats and other observers who scratched their heads at his conclusion, given that he believed what Trump did was wrong. Senator Chris Coons, a Democratic senator from Delaware, said this past Friday, quote, I am encouraged that he at least was clear and forceful about how wrong and inappropriate the president's conduct was. But I have a hard time with the step from that conclusion to him saying we shouldn't remove him. Now, what I'm trying to figure out is, if everything stayed the same, but we just changed the names. If President Barack Obama tried to get Ukraine to launch an investigation into Donald Trump and withhold aid to Ukraine, and Republicans find out about it, and there's an impeachment trial, you think Republicans would acquit him on this? You think they said, oh, I think next time he's going to go through the proper channels? I mean, so because they should ask him that question. Well, wait a second, hold on. They should ask them that question and force them to answer it. Wait a second, hold on. You trying to tell me if President Barack Obama did this, then you would go along with that? You wouldn't try to remove him from office? But other Republicans said they welcomed Senator Lamar Alexander's ultimate conclusion that Trump did not deserve removal, even if not all of them agreed with him on the underlying facts of the case. Okay, so Senator Kevin Cramer, Republican from North Dakota, told reporters this past Friday, quote, I think a lot of thoughtful people will come to the same ultimate decision with varying degrees of belief about the case the House made. Senator Ben Sasse, Republican from Nebraska, told reporters this past Thursday, let me be clear, Senator Lamar speaks for lots and lots of us. Lots and lots of Republican senators agree with Senator Lamar Alexander. Though Senator Ben Sasse declined to answer a question whether he personally thought Trump's actions were improper. Senator Lisa Murkowski, Republican from Alaska, who needs to be voted out of office. Okay, she said that she was voting against hearing witnesses. She said this past Friday morning, she put a final nail in the coffin of the chance to hear from witnesses, such as former White House National Security Advisor John Bolton, who essentially confirmed the House of Representatives' allegations against Trump in a new book when she announced that she would vote for no witnesses on this issue. Her statement made even less sense than Senator Lamar Alexander's. In essence, she threw up her hands in frustration at the whole process, which she denounced as rushed, partisan, and incapable of producing any fairness at all. I mean, when you listen to some of the excuses that they give, you have to ask, it's like, you understand history and law and the Constitution? Do you understand your responsibility as a U.S. Senator? She said, quote, "I have come to the conclusion that there will be no fair trial in the Senate. I don't believe the continuation of this process will change anything. It is sad for me to admit that as an institution, the Congress has failed," end quote. This is what Senator Lisa Murkowski said of Alaska. Now, her statement, which did not include a judgment on Trump's actions, appeared primarily aimed at shielding Supreme Court Justice John Roberts, who presided over the presided over the trial, Supreme Court Justice John Roberts, from potentially having to vote to break a possible 50-50 tie of the witness issue, a scenario Republicans wanted to avoid even if the conservative justice was ultimately unlikely to do so. Senator Lisa Murkowski denounced those who would, quote, "further politicize this process and drag the Supreme Court into the fray," while attacking the Chief Justice, an apparent reference to a question asked by Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat from Massachusetts, during Thursday's question and answer portion of the trial. A vote by Chief Justice Roberts would not have been unprecedented. The Chief Justice in the 1868 trial of President Andrew Jackson was allowed to cast a tie-breaking vote on two procedural motions. So Senator Chuck Schumer of New York asked Chief Justice Roberts about that same issue, about what happened with the Chief Justice in the impeachment trial of President Andrew Johnson. Chief Justice Roberts responded that was dealing with two procedural motions, as opposed to the Chief Justice voting, as opposed to the Chief Justice being a tiebreaker when it comes to hearing witnesses. This is an example of how voting for the U.S. senators matters. Every U.S. senator matters, okay? The vote was 51-49 not to hear from witnesses. If there was 51-49 to hear from witnesses, a simple majority, they would have heard from some witnesses. This is, I try to explain to people, elections have consequences. Okay, you can read the rest of this article here, HuffingtonPost.com, January 31st, 2020. Posted 6:06 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This is from this past Friday. Republicans are twisting themselves into knots trying to justify acquitting Trump. The call-in number, area code 313-778-7600. 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment. We'll go to the phone lines in a few minutes here. Now, I posted this article from Yahoo News, picked up by BusinessInsider.com, January 29th, 2020. The name of this article, 3 years ago, Alan Dershowitz said Trump would be a corrupt president. Now he's part of his impeachment defense team. This is Alan Dershowitz. Now, Alan Dershowitz was friends with Jeffrey Epstein, okay? Alan Dershowitz said he got a massage at Jeffrey Epstein's house, but he kept his underwear on. So if you watch the coverage on MSNBC, former Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill referred to him as Mr. I kept my underwear on. Read this article from Yahoo News. 3 years ago, Alan Dershowitz said Trump would be a corrupt president. Now he's part of his impeachment defense team. Alan Dershowitz said in the lead up to the 2016 election that Donald Trump was more corrupt than Hillary Clinton. Quote, there's no comparison between who has engaged in more corruption and who is more likely to continue that if elected president of the United States, end quote, he said. The former Harvard law professor, now he was not a constitutional law professor. Lawrence Tribe is a constitutional law professor at Harvard University. The former Harvard law professor is now defending the president in the ongoing impeachment trial. Now, Dershowitz's argument is, well, I'm not really defending the president, I'm defending the Constitution. Okay? Whose side are you arguing for? Now, despite being a vocal opponent of Trump's views on various matters, Dershowitz said he is representing the president, quote unquote, on principle. Okay. All right. So read the rest of the article. We'll post these articles here on the thread of the broadcast. Then there was another one I got to pull up of Dershowitz because he was backing away from a lot of his comments. Let's go quickly to the phone lines. Let's go to John, line 1, and then we're going to go to clip 4. We're going to go to clip 4, then with Alan Dershowitz. Hey, John, welcome to the African History Network show. Tell us where you're calling from. Yeah. Okay, so there are 3. There are 3 out of 100, and one is a Black Tea Party Republican, Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina. That's right. So the only other 2 Black senators are Senator Cory Booker and Senator Kamala Harris. They voted. They voted to hear from witnesses. There are 53 Republicans in the U.S. Senate. There are 45 Democrats plus 2 independents, Senator Angus King and Senator Bernie Sanders. That's 47. You had two Republicans, Senator Mitt Romney and Senator Susan Collins, who voted to hear witnesses. That wasn't enough. Well, they should vote on Wednesday. They should vote on Wednesday to acquit. This coming Wednesday, they should vote to acquit. The House of Representatives, let me explain. The House of Representatives could have a hearing and subpoena John Bolton to testify. John Bolton said he was willing to testify in the impeachment trial if he was subpoenaed. Prior to that, when they had the House hearings, he said, if you subpoena me, I'm going to sue you. So they're trying to figure out, well, why do you want to talk now? So some people may suspect it has something to do with his book, and he was trying to get the manuscript of his book done before he testified. Yeah. Okay, John. Okay. All right. Okay. Thanks for calling. All right. Let's go to, okay, I want to go to clip 4 here before we go to the break. So this is Ari Melber. So Ari Melber is the chief legal correspondent for MSNBC. Ari Melber spoke with attorney and law professor emeritus from Harvard University, Alan Dershowitz. This is from Friday, January 31st, 2020. Dershowitz, if Trump was impeached for bribery, extortion, issue would be very, very different. Let's go to this clip.
Alexander today, again, making some news. The Republican effectively found that they did prove quid pro quo. You made a statement that I thought was really striking because quid pro quo revolves around the deal, around extorting a bribe, around having a deal, and whether that deal, as you say, is corrupt. Take a listen to something that a lot of people found striking, given that the issue is extorting that bribe. So Senator Alexander, Republican today, says they did prove that. Here was something you said about criminal-like conduct.
Stating exactly.
Professor, I will give you time, but I'm going to play.
He didn't say bribe.
I'm going to play you on the Senate floor.
Not his words.
And I'll play his words as well, sir. Here you were on the
Sir,
Senate
please.
floor. Take a look.
The position that I've derived from the history would include, and this is a word that has upset some people, but would include criminal-like conduct akin to treason and bribery.
Akin to bribery. And as for Senator Alexander,
That's right.
you and I both like to work with the record evidence. Let's do it. I'll put it back up on the screen for everyone. Senator Alexander says that he thought the Democrats proved Trump froze aid to pressure Ukraine to investigate the Bidens. Aid for pressuring the investigation, which even Bill Barr has said would be not something he'd be involved with because it's not appropriate in the United States. So that is what I'm referring to. And my question to you is, how do you say you can't impeach unless there's that kind of conduct when it appears that's exactly the kind of conduct at issue?
Because they didn't impeach him for that. They impeached him for abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. Had they impeached him for bribery, the issue would be very, very different. Had they impeached him for extortion, the issue would be very different.
So if they use those words, you'd be fine with it?
Impeach him for bribery.
You'd be fine with it if they used the B word?
Instead, they impeached him for
Is
abuse
this a
of power.
drafting issue then? You'd be fine with it if they used the B word?
No, it's not a drafting issue because they had Professor Tribe on their side. They had a lot of zealots on their side. If they had the evidence, they would have been obviously smart enough to allege bribery or extortion or any of these other things. They didn't have the evidence. They didn't have the vote on that. So they had to come up with some non-constitutional, vague, open-ended criteria that James Madison would have rejected out of hand. Abuse of power, obstruction of Congress. It's because they didn't have the evidence. And Lamar Alexander didn't say that he found that they committed bribery or extortion. If he had found that, then perhaps he would have said, I'll vote for.
I just showed it. He found
what he said is that the charges made against him.
He found aid for investigation, froze aid to pressure Ukraine to investigate the Bidens. That's what he found.
That's not bribery. That's not extortion. And if it were, they would have charged him with it. The point is, if you accuse somebody of dishonesty in an indictment, and then he moves to strike the indictment, that would be granted, even if there were a list of things he did that constituted dishonesty. You have to charge something that's a crime if it's a criminal case, or an impeachable offense if it's an impeachable case.
Right.
Now, they didn't charge impeachable offenses. That's what I was brought in to argue. That's what I argued. If Senator Lamar Alexander accepted that argument, I'd be very pleased. I think he made
I want to get another item
based on his own research.
Okay, so that was from MSNBC. The name of that clip, Dershowitz. If Trump was impeached for bribery, extortion, issue would be very, very different. That's from January 31st, 2020. Okay. Now I want you to hear. We're going to get this clip queued up here in just a minute. Now, this is constitutional law professor Lawrence Tribe. Lawrence Tribe was interviewed by Lawrence O'Donnell on MSNBC. And he is, and now, even when Alan Dershowitz argued his case at the impeachment trial, he said that his position, his thoughts on this were in the minority when it came to legal scholars, and he's correct. He's strongly in the minority. But I want to go to this clip here in just a second. I'm going to pull this up because Lawrence Tribe is a constitutional law professor and a constitutional law expert. Okay, and he is arguing that the argument made by Alan Dershowitz is incorrect. Okay, so we'll go to, let me pull up this clip here, just a second. All right, I just sent that to you. Okay, so we'll go to that clip here in just a minute. Now, if we look at, let's look at the article from New York Times, the first one that dropped dealing with John Bolton's book. This is a huge bomb that dropped January 26. Trump tied Ukraine aid to inquiries he sought, Bolton book says. Donald Trump told his national security advisor in August 2019, that he wanted to continue freezing $391 million in security assistance to Ukraine until officials there helped with investigations into Democrats, including the Bidens, according to an unpublished manuscript by the former advisor, John R. Bolton, all right, and former national security advisor. So the president's statement, as described by former national security advisor John Bolton, could undercut a key element of his impeachment defense, that the holdup in aid was separate from Donald Trump's request that Ukraine announce investigations into his perceived enemies, including former Vice President Joe Biden Jr., Joe Biden, and his son Hunter Biden, who had worked for a Ukrainian energy firm while his father was in office. Now, John Bolton's explosive account of the matter at the center of Donald Trump's impeachment trial, the third in American history, was included in drafts of a manuscript he circulated in recent weeks to close associates. He also sent a draft to the White House for a standard review process for some current and former administration officials who write books. Multiple people describe John Bolton's account of the Ukraine affair. The book presents an outline of what John Bolton might testify to if he is called as a witness in the Senate impeachment trial. Okay. Now, the White House could use the pre-publication review process, which has no set time frame, to delay or even kill the book's publication or omit key passages. Just after midnight on Monday, Trump denied telling John Bolton that the aid was tied to investigations. Quote, if John Bolton said this, it was only to sell a book, end quote. He wrote on Twitter, reprising his argument that the Ukrainians themselves felt, quote, no pressure, end quote, and falsely asserting that the aid was released ahead of schedule, Now, just over dozens of pages in the manuscript, John Bolton described how the Ukraine affair unfolded over several months until he departed the White House in September of 2019. He described not only Donald Trump's private disparagement of Ukraine, but also new details about senior cabinet officials who have publicly tried to sidestep involvement. For example, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo acknowledged privately that there was no basis to claims by Trump's lawyer Rudy Giuliani that the ambassador to Ukraine was corrupt, and believed Giuliani may have been acting on behalf of other clients, John Bolton wrote. John Bolton also said that after the president's July 25th phone call with the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, he raised with Attorney General William Barr his concerns about Rudy Giuliani, who was pursuing a shadow Ukraine policy encouraged by the president, by Donald Trump, and told Attorney General William Barr that the president had mentioned him on the call. A spokeswoman for Attorney General William Barr denied that he learned of the call from John Bolton. The Justice Department has said he learned about it only in mid-August. Okay. Now, she did not say that conversation did not take place. She said that Attorney General William Barr did not learn about the call from John Bolton. That doesn't mean that John Bolton and Attorney General William Barr didn't have that conversation about the call. Attorney General William Barr is just saying, that's not how I found out about the call. And the acting White House Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney, who said, get over it at a press conference when talking about withholding the $391 million in Ukraine aid that was approved by Congress. And the acting White House Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney, was present for at least one phone call where Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani discussed Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch, who just retired this past week. John Bolton wrote, Mick Mulvaney, acting Chief of Staff, has told associates he would always step away when the president spoke with his attorney to protect their attorney-client privilege. So read the rest of this article. This is an extensive article from New York Times. This is the first one. This is from June 26th. Trump tied Ukraine aid to inquiries he sought, Bolton book says, okay? So let's go to this clip here. This is Harvard law professor Lawrence Tribe. He was interviewed by Lawrence O'Donnell. Let's go to this clip.
Senators is this. You may want to vote to acquit Donald Trump, either because you really believe he's innocent or because you are frankly scared of what a vindictive Donald Trump will do to you if you don't vote that way. But I would implore you, not only because America deserves a fair trial and is worth it, but because you're going to have to explain to your constituents as well as yourself and your kids and your grandkids why you voted the way you did if you end up voting to acquit. And the only way you can do that fairly, the only way you can do that is to vote to hear Bolton and other witnesses and the evidence. And I say that because otherwise you'll never be able to explain the way you voted without adopting this remarkably absurd and extreme and dangerous theory that my former colleague Alan Dershowitz is peddling. Namely, it doesn't matter if a president uses the vast powers of his office to shake down an ally and help an adversary in order to get dirt on an enemy and corrupt an election. That doesn't matter. And therefore, you didn't need to hear any witnesses. Nobody will really accept that as a plausible theory. In fact, there is no legal scholar in the country other than Alan Dershowitz who believes it. One of my colleagues, Nico Bowie, used to say that he might agree with Alan, but now that he's explained he doesn't, Alan says, now Professor Bowie is wrong. Not only is he out on a limb from every other scholar, he's out on a limb from the framers of the Constitution. And what would happen if you use that fig leaf to justify your vote? What would happen is you might save your skin, but not your soul, because you would be leaving a message to future generations, to future presidents, that any way they want to abuse the power of their office, any way they want to take appropriated money and turn it to their own benefit, any way they want to shake down an ally at war with an adversary for their own corrupt benefit is just fine, because Trump got away with it since the ultimate ruling was, so what? It doesn't matter. If you leave that message, and if that's the explanation you end up having to give to people, you will harm not only the country today, but you will leave a lesson for future presidents that will be terrible to the republic. It will not be a constitutional democracy, but it will be a dictatorship. So I implore you, if you're inclined to vote to acquit this president, don't do it on the ridiculous basis that abuse of power, because it's not a statutory crime, it is rather open-ended, is not a basis to remove. Don't do it on that basis. Do it perhaps on the basis that after you've heard John Bolton and looked at the evidence, you're just not convinced.
Okay, so that was constitutional law expert and Harvard University law professor Lawrence Tribe. That is from The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell. That's from January 29, 2020. Name of that clip, Tribe, T-R-I-B-E, Dershowitz defense of Trump, quote, extreme and dangerous, end quote. We're coming up on the break, 9:10 a.m. Superstation WFDF. I'm Michael Imhotep, the African History Network show. We'll be back in a few minutes. All right, guys. All right, guys, we'll be back in a couple minutes here. How's everybody doing? 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment. 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment. 778-7600. All right, in the second hour, we'll talk about the day Dr. King's house was firebombed. January 30th, 1956. We'll deal with also an African-American female cook who helped fund the Montgomery bus boycott as well. Okay, stand by. We'll be back in a couple minutes here. All right, let's see who we have here. How's everybody doing? Just a second, we'll be back in a couple of minutes here. All right, let's see who we have. Tyrese, Juanita. Okay, stand by. We'll be back in a couple of minutes here. All right, stand by, everybody. We'll be back in a couple of minutes here.
Seconds.
All right.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM Superstation WFDF. Hey, I'm Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, February 2nd, 2020. We are live. Give us a call, area code 313-778-7600. If you have a question or comment, 313-778-7600. If you have a question or comment, right before the break, we were talking about the impeachment trial this past week, the sham of the impeachment trial. And then in our second hour, we're going to get into some history as well. All right, so we're broadcasting on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network, as well as 910 AM Superstations Facebook page, 910 AM Superstation WFDF. We're also broadcasting on my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP, on YouTube also. Okay, so everybody share this broadcast and invite your friends to tune in. All right. So February 1st, well, you know, let's see, yesterday I was at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. My friend, Dr. Daryl Scott, who is a history professor at Howard University and a past president of ASALA, Association for the Study of African American Life and History. He was speaking at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. So a group of us from ASALA and, you know, historian Jaman Jordan, you've heard Jaman on the show. I've had him on a few times. We all went to dinner afterwards, and we were talking about history. We had long conversations with Dr. Daryl Scott. So we're going to get Dr. Scott here on the show soon. Probably next week, we'll have Dr. Molefe Kete Asante on the show. Dr. Molefe Kete Asante is the chair of the Afro-American Studies Department at Temple University in Philadelphia. He'll be speaking at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History on Sunday, February 16th. He will also be speaking at Detroit Unity Temple that Sunday morning at their 10 a.m. service, Sunday, February 16th also. Detroit Unity Temple, on 2nd Avenue in Detroit. Okay, so we'll talk some more about that next week, and which when they give me a flyer, we'll put that on our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All right, I'm speaking at Nandy's Knowledge Cafe coming up Saturday, February 8th, 2020, 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. This is my African American History Month presentation, so we'll do a Black Migration 1619 to 2019. We'll dispel some myths about that August 20th, 1619 date as well. African people were here in this land long before that. We'll also talk about this year's annual theme for African American History Month, which is African Americans and the Vote. African Americans and the Vote. Okay, so this is a free event, donations accepted. Nandy's Knowledge Cafe is located at 71 Oakman Avenue in Highland Park, Michigan. And we'll have a flyer on our website. We should have it up Monday at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Also, sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, to 22828 to sign up for our email newsletter. K-E-M-E-T, to 22828 to sign up for our email newsletter as well. Okay, so January 30th, 1956, Dr. King's house was firebombed. All right. A lot of people don't know about this. An unidentified white supremacist terrorist bombed the Montgomery, Alabama home of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. No one was harmed, but the explosion outraged the community and was a major test of Dr. King's steadfast commitment to nonviolence. Dr. King was relatively new to Montgomery, Alabama at this time, but had quickly involved himself in the civil rights struggle there. He was a leading organizer of the Montgomery bus boycott. So he was elected to be the president of the Montgomery Improvement Association. The Montgomery bus boycott started Monday morning, December 5th, 1955, as a result of Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat on the bus there at Montgomery, Alabama, December 1st, 1955. The bus boycott is going to last 381 days. 2 days after Dr. King's house was firebombed, we know the historic lawsuit of Browder versus Gale was filed, G-A-Y-L-E, Browder versus Gale. The plaintiffs in the lawsuit were Aurelia S. Browder, Claudette Colvin, Mary Louise Smith, and Susie McDonald. These were 4 African-American women who refused to give up their seats on the buses there in Montgomery, Alabama. Okay, and shout out to everybody watching us on YouTube. Let's see, we have Ronald, we have Vigilant Watcher, Ian, Frazier on the West, Scrooge, who else we have here on our YouTube channel? LaStar, Michelle, Kesha, Derek, Niu Sayer, and Rutgers Shipping LLC and DOD. Just a few of the people watching us on our YouTube channel. Michael Imhotep, I-M-H-O-T-E-P. I'm trying to broadcast more on our YouTube channel. So shout out to everybody watching us on YouTube as well. Okay, and also if you want to donate to the African History Network, $, the AHN show through Cash App, $, the AHN show through Cash App, because we have Cash App now, or paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show. You can also do that at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Click on the yellow donate button on the homepage of our website, and you can set up for a recurring donation also if you like. Okay, so Dr. King is getting death threats. His house is firebombed. Now, you heard me talk about before, Dr. King owned guns as well, okay? And Dr. King tried to get a concealed pistol license in 1956 after his house is firebombed, okay, in Montgomery, Alabama. Montgomery is the capital of Alabama. He's denied a concealed pistol license in Montgomery, Alabama. A lot of people don't know this history. And right now I'm reading the book, and let me pull it out because I took some of my books here to do my workshop today. And once again, if you want me to do a presentation for your group or organization, email me, customerservice@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, customerservice@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, or call us area code 313-462-0003, 313-462-0003, especially for the month of February. It's a lot going on, and I'll be in Chicago. I think I'm at Chicago State University Saturday, February 15th for the Ujamaa was it the Ujima Marketplace that the Black Mall is organized in Cassiopeia and the Black Mall. All right, so I'm reading this book right now. We talked about it last week, by Professor Charles E. Cobb Jr. This nonviolent stuff will get you killed, how guns made the civil rights movement possible. And it's dealing with the civil rights movement, and it's dealing with how it was African Americans with guns who were protecting the civil rights workers, okay? So this is an excellent book by Professor Charles E. Cobb Jr. Now, this book here is Dr. King's last book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community, which he wrote in late 1967. Where do we go from here? Chaos or Community, okay? So we have to read Dr. King's writings also, because we actually read Dr. King's books as opposed to getting a watered down revisionist history of Dr. King, we'd have an entirely different impression of him. And then you also want to read Martin, Malcolm in America, A Dream or a Nightmare by James H. Cone. Martin, Malcolm in America, A Dream or a Nightmare by James H. Cone, because this book documents how toward the end of both of their lives, their ideologies were converging. All right. And he looks at passages from speeches from Dr. King and Malcolm X toward the end of both of their lives. So so we look at this is taking place during the Montgomery bus boycott. The boycott brought Dr. King national recognition, but also made him a target of white supremacists. He was speaking at a nearby a nearby church on the evening of January 30th, 1956, when a man pulled up in a car, walked up to Dr. King's house and tossed an explosive onto the porch. The bomb went off, damaging the house, but did not hurt Dr. King. That did not hurt Dr. King's wife, Coretta Scott King, who was inside with the couple's 7-month-old daughter, Yolanda King. News of the bombing spread quickly, and an angry crowd soon gathered outside King's home, a matter of minutes after his home had been bombed. Standing feet away from the site of the explosion, Dr. King preached nonviolence. He said, quote, "I want you to love our enemies." He told supporters, "Be good to them, love them, and let them know you love them," end quote. It was a prime example of Dr. King's deeply held belief in nonviolence, as what could have been a riot instead became a powerful display of the highest ideals of the civil rights movement. Now, at the same time, Dr. King owned guns, and he tried to get a concealed pistol license after this. TheGuardian.com has an article about this. Now, when you read, so EJI.org, Equal Justice Initiative, they have an article about this, and I don't have it in front of me. But in one of these articles, it talked about how on the scene was the chief of police and the mayor, Mayor William A. Gale. So it's quite possible that Dr. King said that he didn't want a riot to break out, but it's quite possible he may have said that to quell the crowd because the chief of police and the mayor were there, and this is at the time of the Montgomery bus boycott, and they do not want a riot to break out. Okay, so let's continue here. Dr. King added, quote, that quote, if I am stopped, this moment will not stop. If I am stopped, this moment will not stop. Will not stop, end quote, a sentiment he repeated through his life. Later that same year, while the boycott was still in effect, someone fired a shotgun at Dr. King's home, and they continued to receive death threats and intimidation, including a threatening letter from the FBI, until Dr. King was assassinated in 1968. The bombing was only one chapter in a long history of violence against civil rights leaders and African Americans that continues to this day. Bombing, shootings, and arson at African American churches remain shockingly common in the United States. And they talk about the massacre that Dylan Roth committed in 2015 at Mother Emanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church there in South Carolina. All right, now, when you look at the article here, and we'll try to pull it up, this deals with, earlier this week, I did an 1.5-hour broadcast dealing with the day Dr. King's house was firebombed, 1956, January 30th, 1956. His house is also going to be fired again later, September 1956 also, okay? But there's an article dealing with when Martin Luther King gave up his guns from TheGuardian.com, when Martin Luther King gave up his guns. And this was after Bayard Rustin convinced him, who Bayard Rustin was preaching nonviolence, convinced him to give up his guns. But Dr. King is still going to have men around him who are protecting him with guns and also protecting civil rights workers with guns. And Dr. King is sometimes going to use the Deacons for Defense and Justice, who were founded in 1964 to protect civil rights workers. So if we look at this article from theguardian.com, and we'll post all these links here on the thread of the broadcast, when Martin Luther King gave up his guns, in his 2011 book, Gunfight, UCLA law professor Adam Winkler notes that after King's house was bombed in 1956, the clergyman applied in Alabama for a concealed carry permit. Local police loathed to grant such permits to African Americans, deemed him unsuitable, and denied his application. The lesson from this incident is not, as some NRA members have tried to suggest in recent years, that King should be remembered as a gun-toting Republican. Among many other problems, this portrayal neglects to acknowledge how Republicans use conservative anger about civil rights advances to win over the Dixiecrat South to their side of the aisle. Rather, the fact that Dr. King would request license to wear a gun in 1956, just as he was being catapulted onto the national stage, illustrates the profundity of the transformation that he underwent over the course of his public career. While his transformation involved a conversion to moral nonviolence and personal pacifism, that is not the whole story. Dr. King's evolution also involved a hesitant but ultimately forceful embrace of direct action, broad scale, confrontational, and unarmed. That stance had lasting consequences in the struggle for freedom in America. But what happens is when you read books like this, Nonviolent Stuff That Gets You Killed, when you read articles from the Washington Post, because there was a number that I shared in the broadcast I did earlier this week, it's a much deeper history here. And while they are preaching nonviolence on the surface, it's black men around them, and in some cases black women around them with guns, who are protecting the civil rights workers. So if we look at the back of this book, they have a synopsis on the back of this book, this Nonviolent Stuff That Gets You Killed. Visiting Martin Luther King Jr. during the Montgomery, Alabama bus boycott, journalist William Worthy almost sat on a loaded pistol. Quote, "just for self-defense," end quote, Dr. King assured him. It was not the only weapon Dr. King kept for such a purpose. One of his advisors remembered the Reverend's Montgomery, Alabama home as, quote, "an arsenal," end quote. Like Dr. King, many ostensibly, meaning on the surface, many ostensibly nonviolent civil rights activists embraced their constitutional right to self-protection. Yet this crucial dimension of the Afro-American freedom struggle has been long ignored by history. In this Nonviolent Stuff That Gets You Killed, Professor Charles E. Cobb Jr. recovers this history, describing the vital role that armed self-defense has played in the survival and liberation of African-American communities. Drawing on his experiences in the civil rights movement and giving voice to its participants, Professor Charles E. Cobb Jr. lays bare the paradoxical relationship between the nonviolent civil rights struggle and the long history and importance of African Americans taking up arms to defend themselves against white supremacist violence. All right, so check this out. Now, he wrote an article for the Washington Post, January 28, 2014, entitled, the name of his book, this Nonviolent Stuff That Gets You Killed. And he talks about armed self-defense, armed resistance, and he says, the tradition of armed self-defense in Afro-American history cannot be disconnected from the success of what today is called the nonviolent civil rights movement. Participants in that movement always saw themselves as part of a centuries-long history of Black life and struggle. Guns in no way contradicted the lessons of that history. Indeed, the idea of nonviolent struggle was newer in the African-American community. Let me repeat, indeed, the idea of nonviolent struggle was newer in the African-American community, and it was protected in many ways by gunfire and the threat of gunfire. Simply put, because nonviolence worked so well as a tactic for effecting change and was demonstrably improving their lives, some African Americans chose to use weapons to defend the nonviolent freedom movement. Although it is counterintuitive, Any discussion of guns in the movement must therefore also include substantial discussion of nonviolence and vice versa. So read this article, because he goes into it, and then you gotta read. You have to read the book, okay? And I mean, because when you read this book, when you read Dr. King's last book, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, and in chapter 2 of his book is called Black Power. It's about the Black Power movement. When you start really studying this history as opposed to the anecdotes and what we think happened, you get a totally different, you get a much better understanding of history and more accurate understanding of the history, but it contradicts a lot of the misinformation that's floating around. Then read Professor Nicholas Johnson's article for the Washington Post. Let me see now which one. He wrote 2 of them. This is from January 27th, 2014. I think this is the first one. The What and Why of Negroes and the Gun, the Black Tradition of Arms. The What and Why of Negroes and the Gun, the Black Tradition of Arms. And let's see here. Now let's go to the other one he wrote. Negroes and the Gun, Nonviolent Winchesters and the Fine Art of Concealed Carry in the Modern Civil Rights Movement. And in this article, Professor Nicholas Johnson, who wrote the book Negroes and the Gun, the Black Tradition of Arms, said Rosa Parks recounts vividly a table filled with guns as she and her husband Raymond Parks started hosting activist meetings at their house on Huffman Street. This is in Montgomery, Alabama, and they're going to have these meetings also during the Montgomery bus boycott, which lasted 381 days. And her husband Raymond's gun was a comfort when harassment began because they were getting death threats. Legendary activist Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth rode to the rescue with a 15-car caravan of armed African-American men when freedom riders were menaced by a crowd in Anniston. Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth's good friend, Reverend Ed Gardner, would later capture the dichotomy that undergirded the movement and a quip about his quote-unquote nonviolent Winchester. All right, so read that article also. So when you actually study this history, it's entirely different than a lot of the stuff that's fed to us at these Dr. King Day celebrations that are sponsored by corporate America. All right, are we coming up on a break? How soon before the break? Huh? Right now. All right, we're coming up on a break. You can give us a call, area code 313-778-7600, 313-778-7600. When we come back, we'll talk about February 1st, 1965. Dr. King and hundreds are arrested for protesting, trying to get the 1965 Voting Rights Act passed. 9:10 a.m. Superstation WFDF on Michael Imhotep, the African History Network show. We'll be back in a few minutes. All right, stand by, everybody. How's everybody doing? Stand by. Okay, everybody on Facebook, share this broadcast. Invite your friends to tune in also. Let's see. We got Ronald on YouTube. Everybody on YouTube, share this broadcast as well. Indigo, Derek. All right, so my African American History Month DVD bundle pack is available right now at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. It's a 15 DVD bundle pack plus an additional one. So it's like a $250 value on sale for $100. We have those shipping out this week. So you can order those now. We're going to post a link here. Just a second. Let me post this here. So who's on here from Detroit? Facebook or YouTube? Who's watching us from Detroit? Now, I will be in, look out for information about me coming to Chicago. I'll be in Chicago for the at Chicago State University for the Ujima Marketplace for February. The Black Mall is organizing that. And let me post this here. How's everybody doing on Facebook? Everybody share this broadcast. How you doing, Erica? We have Hidden Colors back in stock. All the Hidden Colors back in stock. Hidden Colors 5, and we have 1804 back in stock also. All right. How much time before we come back from the break?
10 seconds.
Oh, quick. Can you
yeah, I can go something.
All right. I'll be right back.
It's like a nice set of power tools. And it's not like the wall. It's not I think it's so that your lives are a nice second. Not detail. What? I thought it was 10. It's 10:22 already. The 10 is 10. 9. It's so weird. What? Also in this game, man. I think I'm going to MVP so that you and MVP and they go against. So did you like the game? Yeah, that was awesome. Just don't be disappointed if I'm not. Oh, Mahomes could be cute. Oh, you'll be buying me something on the way home after I win my $5 last year. 4. Our bet? And what was that? Right now.
All right.
30 seconds.
All right, we're back. Okay. 30 seconds.
Yep.
How's everybody doing? All right, stand by, and then
3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation WFDF. Hey, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, February 2nd, 2020. Calling numbers area code 313-778-7600, 313-778-7600. Saturday, February 8th, 2020, 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. I will be doing a fantastic African American History Month presentation dealing with a lot of history at Nandy's Knowledge Cafe. Nandy's Knowledge Cafe, NANDI''S, located at 71 Oakman Avenue in Highland Park, Michigan. 71 Oakman Avenue in Highland Park, Michigan. Okay, it's a free event. Donations accepted. I have my DVD lectures there as well. We're going to deal with Black migration 1619 to 2019. We're going to dispel a lot of myths about the August 2016-19 date. Even though it did happen, we were here in this country tens of thousands of years before that, number one. Number two, codified slave laws didn't exist in the 13 colonies in 1619. The first colony to have codified slave laws would be Massachusetts in 1641. They didn't come to Virginia till 1661. Okay, so we're going to deal with a lot of history. We'll also deal with this year's theme for African American History Month, which is African Americans and the Vote. African Americans and the Vote, and deal with some of that history. The 2019 annual theme for African American History Month was Black migrations. Okay, so you're going to come on out. You're going to be blown away. That is Saturday, February 8th, 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. at Nandy's Knowledge Cafe, located at 71 Oakman Avenue in Highland Park, Michigan. It's a free event, donations accepted. You can also give us a call. We'll have this information at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. You can also give us a call, area code 313-778-7600, 313-778-7600. Give us a call, area code 313-462-0003, 313-462-0003. And we'll have this at our website, also AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. If you want me to do a presentation for your group or organization, email me at customer service at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All right. So February 1st, 1965, Dr. King and hundreds of voting rights protesters were arrested. This comes from EJI.org, Equal Justice Initiative, EJI.org. So in Early 1965, civil rights groups, including Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, began concentrating on voter registration in Selma, Alabama, a city with the lowest voting registration record in the state's Black Belt region. Dallas County Sheriff Jim Clark, okay, there in Alabama, Jim Clark, others in local law enforcement and county registration employees regularly use violence, discrimination, and intimidation to prevent African-American residents of Selma, Alabama from registering to vote. Though African Americans constituted approximately 50% of Selma, Alabama's population in the 1960s, only 1 to 2% of African Americans in Selma, Alabama registered to vote. Okay, they constituted 50% of Selma's population, but only 1 to 2% of African Americans in Selma were registered to vote in the 1960s. On February 1st, 1965, Dr. King led more than 250 marchers to the Dallas County Courthouse to register to vote. All of them were arrested during the peaceful demonstration and charged with parading without a permit. In a letter written from the local jail that same night and later published in the New York Times, Dr. King decried the racist conditions in Selma, Alabama, and observed that, quote, "there are more Negroes in jail with me than there are on the voting rolls," end quote. The arrest of Dr. King and the other civil rights activists resulted in protests in which African Americans were injured and killed. Despite these attacks, Dr. King and other civil rights leaders continued their work and organized another voting rights march from Selma to Montgomery the following month, March 7th, 1965. Bloody Sunday, Dr. King wasn't there for Bloody Sunday. They're going to have another one after Bloody Sunday, which they're going to actually get the protection that they need to march. So there's going to be another one after Bloody Sunday as well. The most famous one that we many of us know of is March 7th, 1965, Bloody Sunday, when the protesters are attacked by the Alabama State Troopers. All right, so that's EJI.org, Equal Justice Initiative. They have articles each day dealing with this date in history. All right, now there was another story that I wanted to get to, and we got to pull this one up. Last week I talked about this a little bit. This is a little known historical figure, and this deals with Georgia Gilmore. And she was a cook there in Montgomery, Alabama during the Montgomery bus boycott. And she's going to feed a lot of the protesters during the Montgomery bus boycott. I saw an article from National Public Radio, NPR.org, dealing with Georgia Gilmore. And then there was also one from the New York Times as well, okay? So, and what's interesting about this is she is a unsung hero. And in the article from the National Public Radio, it talked about how she ended up starting a business. Actually, she ended up starting a business because she got fired from her job for her participation in the Montgomery bus boycott. Okay, so we're going to deal with that, and we're going to try to also squeeze in this article dealing with Vicente Guerrero in Mexico. Okay, 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment. 313-778-7600. All right, so February is African American History Month, and contrary to popular belief, this was not the only time of the year that it was not designed to be the only time of the year we study our history, right? When we look at the origins of African American History Month, we have to talk about Dr. Carter G. Woodson and the founding of the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, September 9th, 1915 in Chicago. I talked about this today at my presentation at Detroit Unity Church. And then also we dealt with that some on Saturday at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. What I find, two things that I find when I attend a lot of Black History Month celebrations. One, they don't talk about Dr. Carter G. Woodson oftentimes. Two, they don't deal with the origins of African American History Month, okay? And you can't deal with that. You can't talk about African American History Month and not talk about Dr. Carter G. Woodson. So Dr. Payroll Dak Bovey has a really good book dealing with Dr. Woodson. Carter G. Woodson in Washington, D.C., the father of Black history. Payroll Dak Bovey is a history professor at Michigan State University, and also my man, Dr. Daryl Scott. He has a new book out dealing with Dr. Carter G. Woodson as well. I bought his book yesterday. So we're going to get Dr. Daryl Scott here on the show in the next few weeks. Look out for that. But one of the things Dr. Daryl Scott talked about when we went to dinner, if you follow him on Facebook, D-A-R-Y-L, it's one R, okay, Daryl Scott. He talks about how, contrary to popular belief, mass incarceration is not related to slavery, and the 13th Amendment did not create mass incarceration. And when we had the conversation last night, it was myself, historian Jamon Jordan, and Dr. Daryl Scott. Daryl Scott is laying out this history going back to after the Civil War ends. And one of the things that we were talking about is how the 13th Amendment, there was a U.S. senator from Michigan, and I forgot his name. Jamon Jordan knew his name, but he was the one who really wrote the 13th Amendment. We think it was like Abraham Lincoln, but it wasn't. And what Dr. Daryl Scott was saying was that clause in a lot of the laws that they're putting in place, not all of them, but a lot of the laws that they're putting in place for African Americans existed for white people, like vagrancy laws. There were vagrancy laws for white people before the slaves were free. The other thing that a lot of people don't know is that Black codes existed during slavery for free African Americans. They didn't just create those after slavery ended, the Black codes. All right. But the clause in the Constitution that says involuntary servitude is illegal except convicted of a crime, duly convicted of a crime, right? That already existed for white people. This is something he was pointing out. One of the things he talked about is how with South Carolina. So we know that South Carolina is the state where the Civil War starts, April 12, 1861, with the attack on Fort Sumter. South Carolina is also the first state to secede from the Union, December 20th, 1860. Okay. South Carolina builds its first prison in 1866. Prior to 1866, South Carolina didn't have any prisons. Now they had county jails, but they didn't have like state prisons. There were 400,000 African Americans who were freed in South Carolina because of the 13th Amendment after slavery ends, right? And he said when they built the prison in South Carolina, it only had 100 beds in it. Because what he's laying out, and he teaches a class at Howard University on from slavery to mass incarceration. From slavery to mass incarceration. And the thing is, when you actually study the history and you study laws and you understand the chronology of this stuff being put in place, it's entirely different than how than our perception of it. It's just like a lot of people, I was just reading an article today from New York Times, with ABC World News, abcnews.go.com, I think it was. And it's talking about the 94 crime bill. And it says a lot of people allege the 94 crime bill created mass incarceration. No, it didn't. Mass incarceration goes back to Richard Nixon's war on drugs, which was declared June 17th, 1971. States were passing longer, harsher sentences in the 1970s, 80s, and early 90s before the crime bill was signed into law September 13th, 1994. You go look at the U.S. prison populations in this country. It starts rising in the early 1970s. It was about 300,000 in the early 1970s. It started rising then. That was long before. You skip over Richard Nixon's war on drugs and Ronald Reagan's war on drugs declared in 1982, and you start mass incarceration in 1994. Just like people try to start the history of African Americans in this country, August 20, 1619 in Jamestown, Virginia, when the Spanish were taking Africans into South Carolina, the territory we call South Carolina, 93 years before that. Juan Garrido, who was born in West Africa in 1480, comes into Florida in 1513 with the Spanish conquistador Juan Ponce de Leon. We know the Khoisan were here going back at least 51,700 years ago. This is what Dr. David Imhotep lays out in his book, The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence. So when you start actually studying history and law, it contradicts a lot of the prevailing notions that people operate based upon if they don't understand history and law. So you'll hear more about that coming up, because this deep history, I was doing some research last night on this. And then also one of the things I was doing research on the US Senate, because historically the US Senate, so the US Senate is created by the US Constitution 1787 at the Philadelphia Convention. We know the Constitution is ratified in 1788. When we go to senate.gov, senate.gov is the official website of the US Senate. And when we study the history of the US Senate, originally the US senators were not elected by citizens. They were appointed by the state legislature. The reason why they were appointed by the state legislature and they served a 6-year term, they did not have to run for election. One of the reasons why was because the task, the job that they had of being witnesses in an impeachment trial was so important that they did not want senators to be subjected to having to worry about public sentiment and running for re-election. So it's not until 1914 that US senators start being elected by citizens. Prior to that, they were appointed by the state legislature. So when you go to senate.gov, senate.gov is the official website of the US Senate. And we look at, let's see, what is it under, I think, institution. They have a whole history. I was on their website last night doing a lot of research dealing with the history of the US Senate. And in these past 2 weeks, there's so much information coming out about law and history. And we understand law and history intersect, they're interconnected. So when I do my presentation, 6 Principles of Political Self-Defense, understanding how laws and policies impact the economic conditions of African Americans, these are some of the things that I lay out. So I'll try to bring that up here. Let's see here, where is it? Origins and development. Let's see, there's a section. Okay, I'm on senate.gov, origins and development. I think it's here. Well, okay, yeah. Direct election of senators. So if you go to senate.gov, senate.gov/history, okay? Click on origins and development. You'll see the heading Senate committees, the Senate and the United States Constitution. For nearly 5 months, the delegates to the 1787 Constitutional Convention debated the provisions in the U.S. Constitution. In fact, several of the Senate-related clauses were especially controversial. Had they been decided in another way, the Senate, as we know it, would have been a different institution. The next heading, constitutional qualifications for senator. The Constitution sets 3 qualifications for service in the U.S. Senate. Age, at least 30 years of age, U.S. citizenship, at least 9 years in this country, and residency in the state a senator represents at time of election. The details of these qualifications were hammered out by the Constitution's framers during the Constitutional Convention of 1787. The next heading, direct election of senators. Direct election of senators. Voters have elected their senators in the privacy of the voting booth since 1914. Prior to that time, state legislatures chose their senators. Prior to that time, state legislatures chose their U.S. senators. Beginning in the 1850s, this process began to break down as political infighting and corruption often left U.S. Senate seats vacant for long periods of time. Reform efforts finally succeeded in 1913 with the adoption of the 17th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution that provided for direct popular election of senators. Okay, so check this out. That's at senate.gov. All right, so let's look at this story from NPR.org, National Public Radio. Meet the fearless cook who secretly fed and funded the civil rights movement. This is from January 15, 2018 by Maria Godoy, Godoy. So in December 1955, after Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the Montgomery, Alabama bus to a white man, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and other African-American ministers and community leaders organized a citywide bus boycott protest that we know about. Less well known is the story of Georgia Gilmore, Gilmore, the Montgomery, Alabama cook, midwife, and activist whose secret kitchen fed the civil rights activists. When Dr. King and others held meetings of the Montgomery Improvement Association at the Holt Street Baptist Church, HOLT, it was Georgia Gilmore who was there, selling fried chicken and sandwiches and other foods to the African-American men and women gathered there who had pledged not to use the city buses until they were desegregated. Georgia Gilmore poured those profits back into the movement, as John T. Edge, EDGE, recounts in his book, The Pot Liquor Papers, A Food History of the Modern South. The Pot Liquor Papers, A Food History of the Modern South. Author John T. Edge said, quote, in the process, her home kitchen became a focus for change. John Edge is the director of the Southern Foodways Alliance, which is based out of the University of Mississippi and documents the intersection of food and culture in the South. Georgia Gilmore organized African-American women to sell pound cakes and sweet potato pies, fried fish and stewed greens, pork chops and rice at beauty salons, cab stands, and churches. Quote, she offered these women, many of whose grandmothers were born into slavery, a way to contribute to the cause that would not raise suspicions of white employers who might fire them from their jobs, or white landowners who might evict them from the house they rented, end quote, John T. Edge says. So see, when we look at segregation, a lot of times we look at segregation, we romanticize segregation. Like everybody was wealthy, everybody owned businesses and stuff like that. Where'd you get that from? I mean, you have a few, that ain't the majority. Even when we own businesses, you still have a lot of us work for white people. Even in Black Wall Street, when you study Black Wall Street, when you read, probably the best book on Black Wall Street is by Hannibal B. Johnson, okay? And I've got the book here because I've read it. I was talking about Black Wall Street today. I've done a 2.5-hour lecture on the history of Black Wall Street. Hannibal B. Johnson's book, Black Wall Street from Riot to Renaissance in Tulsa's historic Greenwood district. Even when you read this book, he talks about how you had African-Americans, you had some poor African-Americans there in the Greenwood district. Everybody wasn't rich, okay? Two, you had some of them who were domestics who worked in South Tulsa, where the white people lived, and they were maids and butlers, things like this. And Thursday night was known as Maids' Night Off. So the maids would come into North Tulsa, into the business district, and spend their money at the nightclubs and restaurants, things like this. So a lot of times we romanticize segregation. I'm not sure where that's coming from. We don't talk about the rampant lynchings and African Americans being forced off their land and things like this, and over assessing taxes. That still goes on today. We see that African Americans in Detroit were over assessed $600 million. That was a tactic. That's a historic tactic that's been used for decades to take our land away from us. So right here in Montgomery, Alabama, okay, even though you had African American owned businesses, I mean, you had some middle-class African-Americans, but you had poor people, you had people who work for white people, you had people who were farmers, but they don't own the land. They're sharecroppers or they're tenant farmers, things like this. So Georgia Gilmore offered these women, many of whose grandmothers were born into slavery, a way to contribute to the cause that would not raise suspicions of white employers who might fire them from their jobs, or white landowners who might evict them from the houses they rented. The money that was, end quote. The money they raised helped pay for the alternative transportation system that arose in Montgomery, Alabama during the 381-day bus boycott. Hundreds of cars, trucks, and wagons that ferried Black workers to and from work, to and from their jobs across town each day. Georgia Gilmore's cooking helped pay for the insurance, pay for the gas, pay for the wagons and vehicle repairs that kept the system going, because they created a dispatch system of 300 cars to take people to and from work and take them to do their shopping and take them to church. Okay, this is when you study the Montgomery bus boycott, and Dr. King's first book that came out in 1958 is called The Montgomery Story. I think I have it back at home. I don't think I have it with me. And that deals with the history of the Montgomery bus boycott. The concept of the dispatch system, they got, see, what served as the template for the Montgomery bus boycott was the 1953 Baton Rouge, Louisiana bus boycott led by the Reverend T.J. Jemison that lasted 8 days. And Dr. King and E.D. Nixon and others in the Montgomery bus boycott are calling the Reverend T.J. Jemison to get advice on how to structure and operate their bus boycott. So they get the idea of the dispatch system from Reverend T.J. Jemison. So the money they raised helped pay for the alternative transportation system that arose in Montgomery, Alabama during the 381-day bus boycott. Hundreds of cars, trucks, and wagons that ferried African-American workers to and from their jobs across town each day. Georgia Gilmore's cooking helped pay for the insurance, gas, wagons, and vehicle repairs that kept the system going. She called the group of women who worked with her in this project the Club from Nowhere, because as Betty Gilmore, Georgia Gilmore's sister, told John T. Edge years later, quote, "It was like, where did this money come from? It came from nowhere. Where did this money come from? It came from nowhere." Georgia Gilmore would attend Montgomery Improvement Association meetings at the church and announce how much she had raised that week, eventually inspiring another group of women in town to start a similar endeavor, John T. Edge says. In February 1956, a Montgomery County grand jury indicted Dr. King and dozens of boycott leaders for unlawful conspiracy. Georgia Gilmore was among those who testified at Dr. King's trial. As the late Reverend Al Dixon told National Public Radio in 2005, quote, "Everybody could tell you Georgia Gilmore didn't take no junk. You pushed her too far, she would say a few bad words. You pushed her even further, she would hit you," end quote. Now, Georgia Gilmore brought that fighting spirit to the courtroom. She fearlessly denounced the white bus driver who had kicked her off a city bus from the witness stand. Quote, when I paid my fare and they got the money, they don't know Negro money from white money, end quote, she told the judge. The testimony made Georgia Gilmore a hero to local African-Americans, John T. Edge says. But, quote, in the white world, she became a pariah. In the white world, she became a pariah. Georgia Gilmore lost her job as a cook at the National Lunch Company. Though John T. Edge says it's not clear whether she was fired or resigned, quote, knowing her testimony would lead to her dismissal, end quote. Dr. King lived a few blocks away from Georgia Gilmore and was a fan of her cooking and her activism. Quote, whenever VIPs would come to town, he would always have Miss Gilmore cook up a batch of chicken, end quote, said Nelson Malden, M-A-L-D-E-N, Dr. King's one-time barber in Montgomery, Alabama, who recalled this in a 2005 interview for National Public Radio. He said, quote, when she was fired from her restaurant job, Reverend King said, quote, well, why don't you go into business for yourself, end quote. So she did. With Dr. King's support, Georgia Gilmore turned her house into an informal restaurant. When Robert F. Kennedy came and Lyndon Johnson came, President Lyndon Johnson came, had been here, Dr. King brought him, Georgia Gilmore's son, Mark Gilmore, who died in 2008, told National Public Radio in 2005. Georgia Gilmore's quote, Georgia Gilmore's house became a clubhouse for Dr. King. John T. Edge writes, and often the first stop for people in the civil rights movement who visited Montgomery, Alabama. When Dr. King arrived in Montgomery during the 1965 march from Selma to Montgomery, he beelined to Georgia Gilmore's kitchen for pork chops. No wonder Dr. King gained weight later in years. He was eating Georgia Gilmore's cooking. Georgia Gilmore died on the 25th anniversary of the Civil Rights March from Selma to Montgomery. She had spent the morning preparing chicken and macaroni and cheese to feed people marching in observation of the anniversary. Her family served that food to those who came to mourn her. So check out this fantastic story from NPR.org, National Public Radio, January 15, 2018 by Maria Godoy, G-O-D-O-Y. Meet the fearless cook who secretly fed and funded the civil rights movement. All right. And I'm going to do a separate broadcast dealing with this as well, so I can go deeper into it. All right. Want to remind everybody, coming up Saturday, February 8th, 2020, 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. at Nandy's Knowledge Cafe. Michael Imhotep, myself will be doing a fantastic presentation for African American History Month, dealing with Black migration 1619 to 2019, 1619 to 2019, dispelling myths about August 20th, 1619. We'll deal with the African presence in this country going back tens of thousands of years ago. We'll deal with the fact that codified slave laws didn't exist in the 13 colonies in 1619. The first colony to have codified slave laws is going to be Massachusetts in 1641. It comes to Virginia in 1661. Codified slave laws are going to hit the colonies at different times. They don't come to all the colonies at the same time. So we'll deal with Black migration 1619 to 2019, and we'll deal with this year's theme for African American History Month, which is African Americans and the vote. African Americans and the vote. There's an annual theme each year. There's been an annual theme going back to 1928. And we'll deal with some of the history of African American History Month, which goes back to Dr. Carter G. Woodson and the founding of the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, September 9th, 1915. This is taking place at Nandy's Knowledge Cafe, 71 Oakman Avenue in Highland Park, Michigan. It's a free event. Donations accepted. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com for more information. And you can also give us a call, area code 313-462-0003. 313-462-0003, and the number to Nandy's Knowledge Cafe is area code 313-865-1288, 313-865-1288, and I'll have my DVD lectures there as well. If you want me to do a presentation for your group or organization, email me, customer service at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, customer service at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, and also email us there if you want to advertise with the African History Network show. All right, look, here we have to get out of here. Stay tuned for Pastor Mo. Listen to 9:10 a.m. Superstation WFDF. And y'all know I ain't watched the NFL game in like 4 years, right? Y'all know this. You listen to my show, you know this, right? So I ain't even pay attention to who was playing today. I was speaking earlier today at the church, and I said, I ain't watched the game in like 4 years since Colin Kaepernick's been banned from the NFL. I ain't watched the NFL game. It's not because the Lions are sorry. They are, but no, it's because I've said this before. Y'all know me, I've said this before. We've dealt with the history of the national anthem of Francis Scott Key, September 13th, 1914, 1814, during the War of 1812, when he wrote the defense of Fort McHenry. We dealt with the history of Francis Scott Key. We dealt with we dealt with the history of Colin Kaepernick's protest. We've also dealt with the history of Francis Bellamy, who wrote the Pledge of Allegiance in August of 1892. And he was a Methodist socialist. He was a socialist minister as well. So a lot of people who say the Pledge of Allegiance don't know it's written by a socialist as well. We dealt with all that history here. All right, so we have to get out of here. Stay tuned for Pastor Mo, 9:10 a.m. Superstation WFDF. Right now, it's correct wrong behavior. Not over till we win Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you next week. Peace. All right, guys, we got to get out of here. How's everybody doing? We'll probably do another broadcast tomorrow. All right, guys, on YouTube. We got to get out of here. Thanks for tuning in. Everybody, follow us on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network. Follow us on our YouTube channel, also Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP on YouTube, all right? We got a lot of stuff coming up this week. I'm getting ready for this lecture, this presentation Saturday. Those in the Detroit area, come on out. And those in the Metro Detroit, if you in Indiana, if you in Ohio, if you in Chicago, come on down to my presentation I'm doing at Nandy's Knowledge